Laurie Huston's News for the Heart is dedicated to helping you give a voice to your own soul. Our hearts have the power to free us from pain and the struggles that keep us from awakening to our true essence. Join Laurie now as we delve into our heart and soul to find the path that will open us to the possibilities and lead us to the life we love to live.
And good afternoon. This is News for the Heart. And it is the last Tuesday of the month, which means I have my awesome co-host, Tom Campbell, with me. And I don't know if you remember, but last month we sort of ended talking a little bit about the sensitive kids. So I want to bring that up because I think it's a really important phenomena that's going on that just we're not prepared for. And to try and find a way to assist these kids, it's really important. So welcome to the show, Tom.
Thank you, Laurie. It's my pleasure to be here as usual.
Awesome. So let's talk about these kids. What's going on and how can we help them?
Okay, well, the kids you're talking about, or we were talking about at the end, was kind of a new phenomenon that we're seeing, that children in the mostly, I guess 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, up to maybe 20, 25, young adults, a little later, mid to late teenagers and young adults are having a real difficult time integrating themselves into our society, into our culture. There is a lot of withdrawal, a lot of depression.
They don't want to go to school. The schools aren't meeting their needs.
Right. They don't want to go to school. Don't send me to the school. They don't really want to do anything. They don't want to be social. They don't want to interact. They withdraw from their friends. They go, live in the basement of their parents' house, kind of a thing. They get on their computer, and all of their time is spent, looking at a computer monitor, and they kind of drop out of society, drop out of the world. The problem, if they just did that for a while and went on, it wouldn't be a very big problem. But it's a lot worse than that. Yeah. They become unhappy. They become depressed. And after that, they become suicidal in many cases. They just don't see the point in going on. So their life gets less and less interesting and less fun, less and less vital, to where they are in a very bad, unhealthy place, psychologically, spiritually, and of course, when those two go downhill, everything else goes downhill too. They don't exercise, they don't eat well, so physically, excuse me. Just got back from a 4-day event that I was doing. So after talking for 14 hours a day for 5 days in a row, my voice is just a little on the strained side. What happens is my throat dries out with all the talking, and then it gets scratchy and itchy, and then I have to cough. So I'll try to get through it with the minimum amount of efforts and the minimum amount of coughs, but we'll see. Anyhow, it's a real problem that has only become a problem kind of recently, the last 10 years, last 5 or 6 years. So the problem stems from us showing a lot of dysfunction and negativity to children who are really too young to process it.
Right.
And by that, I mean they're too young to see a bigger picture in which they can put all that dysfunction into a useful context. They can't do that yet because they don't have enough life experience to be able to put it into a context and kind of see it for what it is. So what we're talking about here is mainly, at least in my experience, I run into maybe a half a dozen such cases. Usually they're young men, and typically I find out about them because their parents drag them to the TV monitor, where I can talk with them sometimes. The parents are very concerned.
Yeah.
It's basically a failure to thrive. It's a failure to get on with your life, to get out and meet people and do things and make friends and go to school and get a job and all that stuff, and they're withdrawn from all of that. The reason is they see way too much violence and too much dysfunction in the world. Mm-hmm. Now, that violence and dysfunction was pretty much always there. So what's the difference? Why have we changed so much? Well, a couple of things are different. One is the kids that have this problem tend to have certain characteristics in common. One, they're a little brighter than usual, IQ 120, 125. Yes. So they tend to be sensitive. They tend to have empathy. They care about other people. So this is not every kid, but these are the kids who are sensitive, caring. They are looking for their place in the world. They're on the cusp of becoming adults. They're late teenagers or their early 20s up through mid 20s, some a little later, but basically that's the group that's moving from childhood and from school into careers and other things, or going on to college, or kind of making their way into the adult world. And they look at the adult world mostly on the internet, because that's where they get most of their news and information is from the internet. And they see a place that's full of dysfunction. They see wars and bombings and, dead children washing up on beaches. And they see a lot of really dysfunctional stuff. They see a lot of, dysfunction in the way we treat our environment, the way we treat each other. Corporations tend to be more abusive now than they were 30 or 40, 50 years ago, when the corporations were all trying to please the customer with products that were useful. Now corporations pretty much trying to trick their customers into giving them their money for whatever reason. Marketing brings in money much better and much more surely than good products or good service, either one. It's good marketing is where we can make our money. We can convince people that they need to send us their money for whatever reason. And that's more successful than actually making good products or having good service. Because you can manipulate people to do what you want, particularly if those people are fearful. And of course, politicians find the same thing to be true. You can manipulate people more easily if they're more fearful. So everybody that has a kind of a mass audience, like politicians, or I don't know, I guess we'd say, religion has always gone down that route. If people are fearful, they're easy to manipulate. So our culture's kind of gone down that way. So between the politicians and the corporations, manipulating people with marketing and with propaganda has become a much bigger way of life than it was 30 years ago or 40 years ago. Yeah. And if you're an adult, you can kind of sort through all that, and you can kind of throw away the chaff and save the wheat. But if you're not an adult, you have a hard time sorting through that, because it takes 10 or 15 years of life experiences before you become able to sort through that. And these kids don't have that. So we're bombarded with a lot more fear than we ever have been before. The internet's just full of fear. All the conspiracy theories out there are just full of fear. We see anything happens anywhere on this planet that is truly horrible, we'll get to see it. We'll get to see it for 3 or 4 days in a row and not see almost anything else. It'll take all the headlines, because if it's horrible enough, then we'll look at it, for weeks, right. On our TVs. So when young people, without enough experience to sort through all of that, see that, they see a horrible world out there. They see a dysfunctional world. It's trashing its environment. It's people abusing each other. Even the things that are supposed to be humorous, like the sitcoms, mainly are people doing put downs to each other. It's people making fun of and putting down other people. We laugh at other people's misery. We laugh at other people being uncomfortable. That's kind of where humor goes. It's not things that are really funny at all, but things that we have kind of, that's where we've gone with our humor for the most part. And the sitcoms are about somebody who's too dumb or too inept or too whatever, someone that is basically out of it, out of touch, or whatever, rude, dysfunctional. The dysfunctionality becomes the humor. So that's supposed to be the things that we laugh at, is all the dysfunctionality. But if you're a 20-year-old and you grow up in a family, maybe the family's fairly supportive. Maybe it's even a functional family, not a dysfunctional family. But your family sees you acting abnormal. Oh, you're withdrawing socially. I don't want to go to the prom. I don't want to go to the dance. I want to stay here. I don't want to go do this or that. I want to stay here and play my computer game. So the parents start being frightened that, you're becoming withdrawn. So they do things like limit your computer time and, force you to, to get out of the house and do other things and nag you about exercise and eating well. So you withdraw more, because the family isn't really communicating to you. They're trying to make you do better. But they do that by bullying you, by demanding that you do other things, because whatever it is you're doing now isn't right, isn't good enough. So now you even fail there. You're failing everywhere. And you see this world that's awful, and you think, well, I'm going to become an adult in this awful world where everybody's taking advantage of everybody else. I don't want to do that. And then I don't want to be a part of this world. So they withdraw. And they see it when they go to school. Because these sensitive kids who are empathetic and bright, they are different than the majority of kids who aren't so empathetic or caring or bright. And they see that they're having a lot of fun, throwing toilet paper around each other's yards and doing other kinds of things that kids do when they're, and teenagers. And they're looking at that and they say, that's so immature. See, the kids are a little more grown up. So they don't really relate to the traditional kid stuff, because they've been exposed to so much more things that kids weren't exposed to before. So much more of life, and because we only dwell on the seedy side of life, they've seen so much more of the seedy side of life on their screens, and it's just depressing. So it just starts to slide downhill, and year by year, month by month, it gets worse and worse and worse, until that failure to thrive turns into depression. And now they talk about, I don't want to go on. This is what life is. I don't want to go out and join that dysfunction. I don't want to be part of that. They go to school, and because they're serious and concerned, they find that the other kids their age aren't concerned and aren't that serious. And they get called names or brushed off, or nobody really wants to talk about the real important things that are going on in the world, because they're kids and they're not really involved in that shit so much. These sensitive kids are. So the shame, well, all of it's a shame, but the very kids that we need most to come into our culture and into our society are the bright kids, the caring kids, the ones who are empathetic and really want this place to be a gentler, kinder, more functional place. These are the kids that we need desperately to grow up here and be part of our culture. And these are the very ones that are dropping out and giving up because it just looks like it's impossible. So that is a big problem. And 30 or 40 years ago, there might have been one or two or three of these kind of kids out of a group of, hundreds and hundreds of people. They were there, but they were rare. Today, I'm running into it a lot. There's a lot of kids. Now, I said boys more than girls, because traditionally, girls are very focused on what I call the inside world, which is the world of relationship. So in their late teens and early 20s, it's about their friends, their girlfriends and their boyfriends. And that takes up most of their energy and most of their focus. The outside world just is the outside world, and it'll get along perfectly without them because they're focused on being social, interactive. It's all about relationship. And that's where their mind is. The male's traditional focus is on the outside world. The males kind of have to master the outside world as the females master the inside world of relationship. So it's mostly boys who get concerned about the dysfunction in the outside world. Some girls do too. I've seen a couple of girls that have gone down this path, but for every girl I see going down this, there's like 3 or 4 guys that are going down that this dysfunctional path too. So they end up crosswise with their culture, crosswise with their families, because their families are worried about them, pushing on them to do something else that they don't know how to integrate with this world. They don't like this world. The world is harsh. It's immature. It's, focused on how much can I get? What can you do for me? How can I use you? They see that kind of a world when they go to school. They see it on the internet. They see conspiracy theories, and they're too young to look at that and say, "Oh, what a bunch of crap!" What kind of mind made that up? They can't say that because they don't have enough experience. So they look at these conspiracy things and more fear, more terrible things there. So we have the corporations seeding fear. We have the politicians and governments, creating fear, all because it makes it easier to manipulate people who are fearful. And now they're getting fearful about their prospects in this world. And because they're so young, what they want to do is withdraw, get away from it.
Right.
And it's a problem that's gone from occasional to almost everybody knows 2 or 3 people that, have kids in this state of failure to thrive. And it's very hard to explain to them, to talk them out of that. Because first, they don't want to talk to you. They're withdrawn. They really don't want to talk about it. And because they're that age, they kind of have a tendency to think that they know everything. They don't think of themselves, well, I'm young and probably just don't have a big perspective. So, let me, keep going forward. Kids that age tend to feel like they know pretty much everything. Their experiences, well, they'd say, well, I don't really know everything, but everything really important I do know, I've already experienced. So they feel like this is the world. It couldn't be any other way. So they're kind of trapped in this space of, I don't want to belong to this space. I don't want to be a part of it. I want to drop out. But there's no place for them to drop out because our culture, has you get from one treadmill to another. You go through the school and you get out of high school and you go to college. If you go to college, you either go to graduate school or you get a job. And in that job, it becomes a career. That career becomes your source of income. You get married, you have children, and your children go through the same thing that you went through. So there's this way that is our culture has laid out for people to, integrate themselves into our society. And for these kids, that doesn't work because they see this whole thing as dysfunctional. So a lot of it is the internet, in the sense that the internet has so much fear. There's trolls around the internet that when they express their concerns and things, a troll will come in and call them stupid and ignorant and, worse than that, somebody as stupid as you ought to just go die. You know, we have these really, really nasty, venomous trolls out there who will just say anything to anybody just because it makes them feel better to vent their anger on somebody else. So it's a tough place for these kids to be, the sensitive kids, the caring kids. Now, the kids that aren't sensitive and not caring, the world out there, they don't even pay much attention to it. You know, okay, people are having war, but I don't know those people. It's, you know, it's nothing to me. You know, my life is okay. I get good place to live. You know, 3 meals a day. You know, I go to school and play. You know, everything's fine. They're not really aware of it. They don't take any of it too seriously yet because they're a little too young to take it seriously. It's the extra smart, extra sensitive, extra caring kids that are ones that are getting snagged on this thing. So it's a problem. What we need to do is give them that bigger picture so that they can see how to be part of the solution. Their problem is they don't want to just become part of the problem. Oh, I go out there and okay, I'll get a job in a corporation and now I'll be able to abuse people too so that the corporation can get more money. They don't want to be part of it, but they need to see that there are ways to be part of the solution, not just part of the problem. And they don't understand that being negative about life, being negative about themselves, being negative about their prospects and their future becomes part of the problem. You know, that isn't helpful. You know, it's not helpful to have people descend into what? Anger and self-pity, which is where most of them then end up after they struggle with their parents who are trying to help, but, you know, they reject and they see the rest of it. So that they see on the internet, they don't realize that they are sinking into self-pity. Oh, woe is me. There's nothing to do. The world is such an awful place. I don't want to be here. You know, there's really no point in living because everything is so awful. And all of that is an ego full of self-pity. Well, young people have a lot of ego. That's part of being young. When you're young, you have a lot of ego and you're self-centered. That's natural. That's the way it is. You start that way. And what we call maturity is becoming less self-centered. You know, and some people don't mature much no matter how old they get. You know, they're still self-centered when they're 50 years old. And that means they're just not maturing. They're not growing up. They're still acting like children when they're like that. So growing up means becoming more other-centered. And if you descend into self-pity, because it's all about you and how miserable you are and everybody's poking at you, trying to do something else and life is so awful, that makes you part of the problem instead of part of the solution. For sure. And that, if you can convince them of that, that's one thing that will help them because they don't want to be part of the problem. And they don't realize, they think they're withdrawing from the problem when indeed they're adding to the problem. So that's the first thing you can kind of help them see, that by that attitude, they're not helping. They're actually helping drag us down in a negative direction. Self-pity isn't the way. You know, you can't go into life like that and succeed. You're bound to have terrible experiences when you get into that withdrawn, you know, self-referential self-pity. The other thing that they need to see is that, you know, life isn't about so much where we are as far as how evolved or unevolved we are, you know, how kind and how nice and how sweet we are. It's not about where we are. It's about growing up. It's about how to change, how to become better. Okay, you can look at the world and say, well, sure are a lot of people out there with a low quality of consciousness, but I can't change anybody but me, because you can't make anybody else grow up, but you can change you. And changing you, if you grow up, then you will help a lot of other people grow up, And if you do that, you'll be part of the solution. You'll be a part of what fixes things, what helps other people grow. So if you want a kinder, more gentler, more caring, more sustainable environment, the optimal thing that you can do is within your control. It's the only thing that's really within your control, but it's you. You see, and if they see that, now they'll start going the other way. They'll begin to realize that they're part of the problem and they need to evolve themselves. They need to accept that we are where we are because that's where we are. You know, it's not like where we are is terrible. Well, it doesn't matter. That's the truth. Face the truth. This is how we are as humans. We're not very evolved. We tend to be greedy. We tend to be self-centered. We tend to, use people. That's where we are. And the more power we have, the worse that gets for the most part. So that's the way we are. Now, what do we do to change it? Well, now they feel very powerless. I can't change it. I'm just an 18-year-old. How can I change anything? I have no power. Well, they don't understand that the way you change it is by changing yourself. That's your optimal contribution. Even if you were 40 years old and in the prime of your career, if you want to change things, the best way and the biggest contribution you can make is change yourself. That will help other people change. And that everybody's doing about the best they can with what they came in with, the level of quality they've earned to this point. And the whole thing is getting better, decade by decade, where our culture, our society is getting better. It's getting more functional, but it's slow. And everybody needs to pull on those oars to take us toward, better yet, by improving themselves. If you can get that idea to them, then they can turn around on a dime because they realize that where they are is not being helpful. It's actually hurting. And they don't want to be part of it. But where they're stuck is that they see themselves powerless to change anything. Here I am, just a little small person, half an adult, half still a child, and I can't change anything. But yet this place is awful. And that just means that you're going to be in an awful place. All the rest of your life is going to be terrible. Well, it's not like that. The rest of your life can be full of joy. It can be full of happiness. There's a lot of lovely and beautiful people in the world that you can interact with, that you can, be friends with. It's not this desperate, negative place that you see on the internet, because the stuff that gets put in the news and ends up on the internet is stuff that's sensational, and it's stuff that's negative. We only look at the negative. Some guy comes home and loves his wife, pets his dog, and has a wonderful life. Well, that's not news. Some guy comes home, kicks his dog, beats up his wife. That's news. Well, I'll hear about it. You see? So they don't have a very balanced picture of what reality is like at all. It's a very warped picture that they have. But they're young and they don't know that that's a warped picture. That's all they can see. So they're kind of lost there. And as a culture, we've kind of given up protecting our children from violence and things that are beyond their understanding to compute profitably. They don't have enough information or enough experience to deal with things in a positive way. I heard a statistic probably a year ago that said the average 12-year-old has seen something like 237 murders by the time they're 12 years old. Mostly on TV, where people get shot and strangled and pushed off cliffs and whatever else all the time. So you'll see a few murders every night. Well, what's this doing to our kids? When I was a kid, all of that kind of programming came on after 9 o'clock. And all the kids were to go to bed, at 9 o'clock. They went to bed, and adult programming that did have that sort of thing on it then aired. But we've left that go a long time ago. Now the adult programming is run all day long, and we let our kids watch it. And then the internet is very hard to police, and kids will run into some really ugly stuff there, and they're very impressionable. they don't have the experience to put it in context. They see it as an example of the way life is, when it maybe be a 1/100th, a 1% of the way life is. To them on the internet, most of life is like that because that's what they see. So that's what I mean, but they don't have enough experience to really put it in context. And they don't have this idea that, you know, we're all doing the best we can, and as a whole, we're improving, but it's slow. So you don't get angry at other people that are dysfunctional. You realize that's just the way we are. So you deal with it. And you can find happiness, you can find joy, you can find satisfaction in this world as long as you're not negative and as long as you're not part of that problem. So there is a happy life here. It's quite possible. But, you know, you read all the conspiracy theories, and these people are going to get us, and the aliens are going to get us, and the very wealthy people who control all the rest of us, and we're just puppets, and, you know, we don't have any free will, and it goes on, because that's how people get attention. If you want to do something on the internet that gets attention, then you think up something really horrible, and you put that on the internet, and that will get attention. Nice stories don't get attention. So that's just the way we are. We're that way partly because of our survival instincts. Our instincts pay attention to that stuff that could hurt, you know, because what if we have to deal with that? We want to be aware of that hurtful thing. So, you know, man eats blueberries and falls over dead. Well, that's news you can use back in cave day times, right? Where you didn't know about those berries. Somebody does something awful. We look, we pay attention. We don't eat those berries after that guy ate them and fell over dead, you know, but somebody had a nice day and, you know, whatever. Well, that's not news because you can't use that. That's not going to help you deal with, you know, the problems in your world. So everything that's a problem, we're drawn to. We're just drawn to problems. Oh, so-and-so had a fight. Really? What about? You know, we want to know about that. Oh, so-and-so had a really wonderful conversation and had a really great day. Yeah, what else is going on? You know, we don't want to hear about that. So part of it's our instincts for survival lead us to the negative. But, you know, survival as a species really isn't a problem anymore. Our species has grown and prospered and dominated, and we don't need that kind of, you know, that kind of attitude anymore. And we have lots of controls and, you know, other things. It's not such a dangerous place where we live anymore. Yeah. So that's kind of what's going on. Parents need to work with their kids, not just try to force them to be other than the way they are, because the more they push at them, the more the kid withdraws, because it just verifies that the world is a place that's going to push you around, not a nice place. You have to talk to them. Let them tell you about the scary, horrible world that they don't want to be in and what's worse about it. And then, you know, if you really talk to them like you're interested and you care, you're not just trying to find out what's wrong and so you can tell them what's right, you know. Don't make decisions for them. Don't force them to make the choices you want them to make. That's not helpful to them. You have to go there and be with them. See the world from their viewpoint. Join them in that world. And look at their viewpoint and say, yeah, I understand how you could feel that way. But, you know, there's other things that maybe you're not noticing. There's some really beautiful things here, too. And there's a lot of people who are part of the solution. And then look at some of the people who are part of the solution. You know, spend some time talking about people who are part of the solution.
That's very good.
To let them know that there are people out there who are part of the solution. And let them know that as a whole, we are evolving along. And the more people we have that are part of the solution, the faster we're going to evolve. So once they get that idea, then they're going to want to be part of the solution. Yeah. But if all you do is push them and say, you're not doing it right, you need to get out more, you need to go socialize. You can't just sit here and, you know, keep your nose on that computer screen the whole time. And the kids are thinking, leave me alone. I don't need somebody to tell me what to do. Yeah. I'm all grown up now. Yeah. Well, you know, that's the way they feel, right? I'm grown up now. I can make my own choices. So pushing at them and getting angry with them and trying to force them is not helpful. Go to where they are. Join them there. Agree with them about what they see, because generally what they see is what's out there. Explain to them about how most of all those conspiracy things are just junk. Negative stuff, fearful stuff that people put out to get attention. Or it's just noise that's purposely put out on the internet just to keep everybody frightened. Because, the people who would like to manipulate us want us to be frightened. We make better consumers that way. We make better an electorate that way. We're easily manipulated. So you just have to go with them, be where they are, and then point out some things that they just are missing. Point out the nice stuff. There are millions of people engaged in being part of the solution. There's lots of ways you can be part of the solution. The biggest being fix yourself and convince them that that is important. Fixing yourself will matter. You will help the whole thing. It's not a trivial contribution to just fix yourself. That's a major contribution to fix yourself. So you actually do have power to help straighten it out. And it's not like it used to be good and now it's sunk down to, being this hellhole we have to live in. It's not like that. It's been getting better all along. It's always been like this. It's just more obvious now because we have internets, we have other things that, everything ugly, we get to see it immediately and dwell on it. It's always been ugly here. So it's not like it just got ugly. Just for you, at the time you were coming of age, it got ugly. It's not like that. Don't take it personally. See, that's the way a self-centered person sees the world. Everything is about them. Everything's personal. So, no, it's always been ugly like this. It was ugly like this when I was your age. It was ugly like this when your grandfather was your age. It's always been this way. But, your grandfather and I, we tried to make it a better place. We did these things and we had a good life and had a lot of fun and good times as well as some hardship. That's just, the challenge of it. And these kids will come around. It's not that they want to be in this dark place. They feel trapped in this dark place. So you need to just open a door for them. Let them see some bigger picture. And as they do, they'll come out of it pretty quickly. Even though they've sunk down into it over usually years, slowly withdrawing, they can come back in 6 months and start thriving again just by giving them a little information, changing their perspective from one of a child's perspective to a bigger picture perspective. And that's generally what it takes to bump them out of it. But it's a thing that is just new now.
Yeah.
The corporations are a little less friendly. So they're a little more aggressive and arrogant and so on than they were some time ago. Politics is probably a little more aggressive and pushy, and our world is more polarized. Before we had parties we liked and parties we didn't, but everybody was basically trying to work for the good of the people sort of thing, and we just disagreed about the ways that it should be done. Well, now it's not like that. Now it's very polarized. You have the good people on one end and the evil people on the other. And no matter which end you are, you see your end as the good end and the other end as the evil end. And when it gets polarized like that, where there's, it's the good against evil, then that gets to be harder to take. But our politics has gotten very polarized. Our worldview has gotten very polarized. Everything has gotten more polarized because fear polarizes. The more fear you have, the more polarized everything gets. The more beliefs you have, the more opinions that you have. You're hard over on a lot of opinions because you're polarized. Free discussion and dissent and communication is harder and harder to get in a polarized world. So, and today we're more polarized and more divisive than we probably have been for 100 years. Yeah, there were times when we were more like this, but we outgrew them and got over them. But now we're just starting this information age. And whenever you start a new age, there's a lot of turmoil in the beginning before you kind of settle out and it starts to work for you. The industrial age was a real big deal, right? And in the beginning, what happened? People were abused. They worked 7 days a week. You hear stories, I don't know if they're true or not, where children were chained to their workstation, chained to their position, whatever they did in the factory, so that to make sure that they came back, because you'd get them trained and then they'd go leave or something. So people were abused early on, and we had the robber barons, right, who were the ones that went to the top and were very, very wealthy, and they abused everybody else to get more and more wealthy. So we went through all of that at that time in the Industrial Revolution. And then we outgrew that and said, well, we're a society. We need to develop a middle class that has its own wealth and its own things. That's important. So laws were passed, things were done, and we did that. So now we're back into one of those eras of self-centeredness and manipulation, like we were. We've got a new age, the information age, and we got things like the internet, and we haven't yet really decided, how to use that in a good way. So the internet now is like, 100 years ago was like the Wild West. Where most anything you could get away with anything almost. There was very, very few rules, and very little moral sense about what happened. So whoever was strongest won. You're back to the the warlord mentality almost, and that people would do things just to do them, and they got away with it, like our trolls. Nobody's making a big effort to educate trolls about not doing things like that, because you hurt people. Right. Trolls are often just having fun expressing their own trauma, sharing their trauma with others and creating trauma in other people. But, it took us 30 years to get people to stop throwing their litter out of their car windows. True. The society, has to go through growing pains. Well, you got automobiles. Then automobiles became very plentiful. And once they became very, very plentiful, people needed to change the way they lived their life, the way they thought, their attitudes. Everybody back in the 50s and into the 60s, when it became a big thing of governments to say, don't litter. There's fines for littering. Littering is bad manners. And we heard that and heard that and heard that. And about 20, 30 years later, most of the roads are pretty clean. Mm-hmm. But they used to be like driving through a garbage dump. Besides, I don't know if you remember that. I don't know, you may not have been old enough to drive around then, but if you were driving around in the 50s, you'd go down a highway. Of course, you didn't have interstates then. They were all smaller roads. And there would be just tons of litter on both sides of the street. It did look like the roads were just strewn with garbage, because everybody had this idea that if you've got paper or a wrapper or a box or a can or anything you didn't want in your car, you just throw it out the window and you're done with it. People still have that attitude places where they throw plastic around. If you've seen these big swirls of plastic floating around in the oceans, well, that's for the same reason. People just have not yet been educated to the point where they don't just throw the plastic, into the water system, or into the whatever they dump stuff that ends up in the water system. Right. And now we've got these big plastic things, and now one of the worst pollutants in the oceans is plastic. Used to be mercury was the big thing to watch out for in the water. Well, once we realized how bad mercury was in the water, we tended to clean up a lot of that. But in the last 20 years, we've replaced mercury poisoning with plastic. And these little molecules of the ocean will dissolve plastic in about 20 years, 25 years, the plastic will dissolve. in the seawater. But those little molecules of plastic are spread all over the oceans. They're inside all the fish that you eat that come out of those oceans. And a lot of those plastics are not good things to have in your body. They create problems. Some of them are carcinogens. They're not the sort of molecules that your body has evolved to deal with. So they cause trouble. But it's the same thing. Just like in our country, throwing stuff out of your car window, people in parts of Asia is where most of that plastic gets into the water. You see movies of them, and they're just walking, and they'll take a wrapper off something or pull those things off of us and, just toss it. Now it's not their problem. It's laying on the ground. Everybody else does it. They do it too. And you just walk through ankle deep garbage, wherever you're going, mostly plastic trash. So yeah, it took us about 20 years, 30 years to learn not to throw garbage out of the car window, but it worked. We do. So it's going to be the same with the internet. See, that's part of the Industrial Revolution. Gave us automobiles. We as a people had to change our habits and the way we see the world in order to make it work better. Well, we learned. So we don't do that anymore. But now we have this information revolution, and we're at the very beginning of it. Yeah. And we haven't yet learned the kind of habits and niceties we're going to have to learn to make this information revolution as positive and useful as it can be. So now we got an internet that's full of garbage and full of trash and nasty people that can be anonymous and beat up other people. It's like a way to be a bully without being hit back. So a lot of would-be bullies now can go out there and terrorize others without worrying about being hit back. That's very attractive to people who would be bullies, but too frightened to try. You see, so we have a lot of dysfunction there. I suspect 2 or 3 decades from now, a lot of that will start to disappear. But for now, it's still the Wild West. So we're just lucky enough to be in that transition where we get to, live through it when it's mostly wild. Right. It hasn't been tamed yet.
I have one more thing that I'd really like to talk about with regards to sensitive kids. It's diet. A lot of these kids, I know that everything's changing with regards to diet anyway, and probably it's about how bad sugar is. But a lot of parents are having a real difficult time getting their kids to eat. And so the only thing they will eat is junk. Can we maybe address that a little bit? Because I know,
sure.
And adding to the depression and everything.
It does. It adds to the problem. Yeah. If you don't eat well, then you don't think well. If you don't think well, then you're even more prone to be swept into these kind of dysfunctional things. If your body is being dysfunctional because of your food, then it makes it harder for the consciousness to work and to work well. So yes, that is a big point of it, is the junk food. Well, junk food is one of those parts of our industrial revolution that hasn't been tamed yet. We have big corporations, big agribusiness, who have found out how to make money. And they make money by abusing people. They abuse them by putting out cheap, low-cost junk that is high profit. So you put out food not that's nutritious, but that's easy and cheap to make, and charge a lot for it so that it's a lot of profit, but still it's inexpensive because it was so cheap to make. So, if that bag of potato chips cost you a half a penny to make, and you can sell it for $5, well, that's huge profit because it was so cheap. It's real cheap because, we give, we support those markets for, for the corn, for maybe those potatoes, whatever. The farmers will get paid to do them so that they can sell it at a artificially high price because their governments are paying them to make this stuff because it's cheap food. And for the farmers, it's easy to grow. And then all you have to do is pour Roundup on it, and you don't even have to weed it. and you don't even have to pick the weeds out of the harvest. So it's more efficient. You can grow more easily. They called it the green revolution. So we can do that, but we've learned to process those things into cheap products. And yes, people eat that, but it's kind of the parents need to train their children at an early age. What happens when I was a kid, long time ago, dinosaurs roamed the earth, when I was a kid, it was like this in my house, we're having this and this for dinner, and my parents would put out a balanced meal. And if you don't like it, you have to eat a little of it anyway, but not much. But you don't get anything else. If you don't like any of it, well, you can wait to the next meal and maybe we'll have something that you like, maybe not. But today, I don't want it. Well, you go, instead of eating a balanced meal, go make them a peanut butter and jelly sandwich and they'll eat that instead. We don't enforce habits or introduce them to our kids. And, I remember times when I said, I don't like Brussels sprouts or I don't like broccoli. And they'd say, well, you need to eat some of it just so you get the experience of it, because many foods are acquired tastes. And if you don't taste them, you'll never acquire taste for them. So you have to eat a little of it. And of course, as a kid, I'd eat as little of it as possible, but I'd have to eat some of it and then I wouldn't eat anymore. But until I ate everything on my plate, I didn't get anything else. So I couldn't just eat the one part that I liked until I was full. You eat everything on your plate, and only a little bit of the broccoli and a little bit of the Brussels sprouts were put on my plate. Not too much of them, just a couple of bites. But when I finished that plate, I could ask for something else. And whatever else I wanted, I could ask for the stuff that I particularly liked, and I would get it. But if there wasn't anything I particularly liked, I didn't get anything else to eat. Dinner was over. And if you didn't want to eat it, then you just skipped a meal. And the meals were never set out because, that's what the kids liked. The meals were set out to be nutritious, and they were set out basically for adults. Kids got to eat there. So I learned to try all sorts of things. I did learn to appreciate different flavors and different things. The meal never had, there was very little junk that was ever in the house. And if there was anything like candy in the house, it was highly regulated. You just didn't get to eat that. But we don't do that with our kids. We give them whatever it is they want. If they don't want to eat vegetables, then we give them what they do want to eat. If they don't want to eat a healthy breakfast, we give them Fruit Loops that are basically, it's artificial sweet junk. And
I think it's more than that, though. Some of these kids are literally not eating a thing and they're okay with it, but they get to school and their energy drops, or they get so frustrated and angry. I mean, some of these kids are literally not eating anything. And so it's like, well, what can we give them that they will actually eat something? And I think this is where they're struggling, is because they are so sensitive that they're just, they don't want to eat meats with hormones. I mean, a lot of kids don't want to eat meats at all.
Well, that's good. That's a good thing. Okay, and there's a good reason for that. And you could say, well, I don't mind eating meats if they're organic, or I don't want to eat meat at all. I want to be a vegetarian. That's a choice.
Right.
And I would think that kind of a choice, as long as it can be healthy, you can be vegan and eat a healthy, food and get by just fine. Get your nourishment that way. So as long as a child picks, a regimen of food and the way they want to eat that allows them to have a healthy diet, we'll support it. Then make them vegan food or whatever, you see, if that's it. But if what they want to eat is Coca-Cola and potato chips, that's what a lot of kids are doing.
Right.
They're eating snacks. They're eating trash food. Junk food has no nutrition, and they get overweight. They get tired. They don't have much energy. They don't think very clearly, and then they start getting in trouble because
a lot of parents are worried about the ones that are really underweight, though. Like, they're literally not eating because they don't like it. But then as you talk about the information world that we're into now, I mean, kids can now order things online and get delivered to their house. I mean, it's at a time when we could never have done that kind of stuff. But I'm talking about some of these kids that are becoming malnourished because they really are, they're literally refusing to eat anything. And parents are really struggling. And these are more the younger kids. But
when you say anything, do you mean anything healthy, or do you mean just they're fasting?
Well, fasting, because they're refusing to eat anything. So then the parents will try and find something that they'll eat. They'll give it to them, probably too much, and then they'll stop wanting to eat that. Like there's something unique going on with the younger kids. So that we're talking kids below the age of 10 that we just never heard of. I mean, yes, the sugar problem is huge because, again, literally kids are like, because they're so good on the internet, they're hacking into their parents' accounts. They're, buying things without their permission. They're, getting food delivered middle of the night because they can do that now. Couldn't do that when we were kids. But the one issue is that there are kids right now that are just not eating anything.
So you're not eating junk. They're not eating vegetables. They're just not eating.
They're not eating.
Well, then they'll go anorexic.
Right.
And if they go anorexic, then that's a serious problem, right? So is anorexia becoming a bigger thing?
With kids, though, under the age of 10, like it's not because of body image. It's just because they're refusing to eat. Now, maybe it's because the parents don't have the money. I don't know what it is. I'm not sure what it is, but I know there are a lot of parents out there that are freaking out because their kids won't eat.
No, I haven't run into that. I have run into a lot of the kids won't eat things that are healthy.
Mm-hmm.
That I've run into a whole lot of it. They don't want to eat any vegetables. They don't want to eat anything other than what tastes good to them at that moment. Yeah. And they refuse to eat anything except what they want. Yeah. And the parents basically give into that and just give them what they want. So, they live. So they live on sugar cereal and then, candy bars at lunch and, potato chips and Coca-Cola, for dinner, and they don't get any nutrition. Now that I see as a big problem around, but just kids that refuse to put anything in their mouth that are basically fasting and aren't eating, I've not run across that yet. I've run across that they refuse to eat anything that's healthy. Mm-hmm. Yes. But particularly little boys tend to live almost entirely on carbohydrates because that's, their metabolism is running so high that they can burn all that energy off. And it's really not that unhealthy for them that they're just eating carbohydrates and carbohydrates. The sugar isn't good, but the more complex carbohydrates, the grains, whole grains and things like that, well, that's just little boys. They run off a huge amount of energy in a day. And the carbohydrates that if we ate that many carbohydrates a day, like they did, we'd all weigh 300 pounds and, have huge physical problems. But for the little guys, not so much girls, but for the little guys who are active, it's not really a problem. So in that case, they eat a lot, they want macaroni and cheese, they want bread, they want pizza, they want all this carbohydrate rich stuff. But little boys can get away with that because they actually burn those many calories and that much energy. But as they get older, of course, that'll need to change. But still, they need vegetables, they need minerals, they need other things in their food, and giving them supplements may help a little, but it doesn't replace good food. And we need to be a little more firm in encouraging them to eat healthy food and not just give them whatever it is they want. A 5-year-old is just too young to tell you what should be on the menu. I mean, it's too young. It's not old enough to tell you what to be on. You wouldn't let your 5-year-old tell you, where you should move and, where your house should be. They're not that old enough that they get that kind of input. Well, your 5-year-old shouldn't be inputting your menu. If they're controlling the menu, then that's a problem. Mm-hmm. Parents need to control the menu until they're much older. Once they're 18, well, they're on their own. They do whatever they want. But yes, eating bad food, but just not eating at all is something new to me. So I don't know about why they would just refuse to eat. You think they'd get hungry, and if they got hungry enough, they'd want to eat.
Yeah, but then because they don't know what to feed them, they tend to pick the things that aren't healthy. So,
well, that's the problem.
Yes.
Don't offer them those. Say, well, here's 5, 6 things you can eat. You can have this, 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 and this, and it's all healthy. And you can feed them the healthy stuff that tastes good to them, but you need to encourage them to eat well, that's important, that they'll feel better, do better. I know it's hard to convince a child of anything because they know everything. But
well, I think the parents just get so worried because they are starting, like, they do look malnourished. Like, I've seen a lot of kids, both girls and boys, that are looking very malnourished. So however their personality is, that whether they're internal or external, and I'm thinking whatever it is, though, there's something that they're just refusing. And then the only thing that, they're so happy to get them to eat something, even if it is something bad.
Yes, but if, well, what would you like to eat for dinner tonight? Cocoa Puffs. And if the parent says, well, okay, just because they want them to eat something, I think that's a mistake.
Right.
I think it's better to just let them go hungry until they're hungry enough to eat what you give them that's healthy, rather than them deciding what they eat at that age. They're not competent to make that choice yet. So parents need to make that choice for them and give them a balanced diet. Like I said, you don't let your 5-year-old make adult choices. You just don't, because they're not adults yet. They don't have the bigger picture. They will likely hurt themselves. You don't let 5-year-olds play with knives and guns. You just don't. It's just not good. They'll hurt themselves. Well, they'll pick trash food and they'll hurt themselves just like they would with a knife or a gun. You don't give them that choice. If what they want is Cocoa Puffs for dinner, then the answer to that is no. And if they say, well, then I won't eat anything. Well, okay, maybe it'll change tomorrow. We'll see if you get hungry tomorrow. The kids aren't going to starve to death. They are mostly trying to manipulate their parents to give them what they want. I think they're putting pressure on their parents, refusing. Well, I won't eat. I'll just die if I don't eat Cocoa Puffs for dinner. And the parents tend to give in because they're busy, they're overworked, they're hassled, and it's easier to say, well, okay, just this one time, and then it is to put your foot down. But I think the parents need to take charge of what their children eat up until the children are old enough to make that choice for themselves, which is probably somewhere, in the early teens or something, where you give them more choice. But up through then, 3-year-olds and 4-year-olds and 5 and 6 and 7 and 8s are not mature enough to come up with a healthy menu. They don't know anything about nutrition. They can't live on macaroni and cheese and Cocoa Puffs. That's they would if you let them, and if you let them bully you into doing that, then they will, and they'll be, like you say, they'll be sluggish. They won't think well. They won't be doing well in school. They're hard to stay awake, or they're on sugar all the time, and they're wired and bouncing off the walls for a while, and then they're down and kind of depressed and grumpy, and then they get more sugar and then they're bouncing off the walls again. None of that's healthy, particularly for children whose physical systems are growing. To not give that growing system the nutrition that it needs to grow healthily, what you're doing is kind of damning those kids to an adult life of a lot of physical dysfunction. The kids that, eat macaroni and cheese and Cocoa Puffs for their meals, by the time they're 50 and 60, they're going to have aches and pains and cardiac problems and all kinds of other problems, because when they were growing up, their body didn't develop right. They didn't have good nutrition. So it's a problem. And if they don't have good nutrition when they're that young, they're not going to have good nutrition when they're 14, 15, or 16. They're going to have more control over what they eat, and they'll have even they'll still have really bad habits. And anybody that grows up eating junk, by the time they're in their 40s, they've got health problems like people in their 60s. And by the time they're in their 60s, they're dropping dead. They just won't live long. So, okay, it's hard to work with your little children when they're trying to manipulate you and push you. But if you really care for your children, you need to insist that they eat well and they eat good food. You can't let them do that.
Those same kids are depressed and saying they don't care whether they live till they're 60. In fact, they don't want to live till they're 30. Right? I mean, this is where you get that, what do you do? Because they're depressed.
Well, you need to start with them before they ever get that far.
Yeah.
If right at 2 years old and 3 years old, when they're more tractable and don't have much of a view of the world, if you're the one in charge of diet, then they'll get used to that. And that's just the way life will be. But if you start giving them what they want and putting them in charge of their diet, then you're going to have that. And once they are, let's just take sugar, for example, they're sugar addicts. So most children that are 1 year old are sugar addicts. They're addicts before they're 6 months. We give them sugar, and we give them cookies, and we give them cakes, and we give them candy. And so almost all children are addicts. They're addicted. And when they have withdrawals, they whine and fuss and complain and are miserable and depressed like anybody else who's having withdrawal symptoms. So you try to get them off, and they're older, say, you try to get them off so many carbohydrates, including sugar, they get withdrawals from getting off carbohydrates. Well, if you let your kids, take cocaine, to keep them quiet and keep them amused, here, take some, snuff some cocaine here. Well,
point taken.
3 or 4 years down the road, you're going to have problems. They're going to be problem children because they're going to be drug addicts. And that's what we're doing, So we're raising drug addicts, and then we have to continue feeding that drug habit, which gets worse and worse and more until they tend to self-destruct, which means they have, they have poor health problems. They have poor attention problems. They can't pay attention. They have learning problems. And they have health problems. We have now, for the first time ever, kids that are, like 8, 9, 10 years old who are getting diabetes, who are becoming obese. You go back 50 or 60 years, having a 12-year-old with diabetes or a 12-year-old that's obese was like 1 in 10,000. It was like unheard of. And now they're popping up all over. Well, okay, give your children addictive drugs when they're 2 years old, and then fuss about them being drug addicts later. Come on, parents, take some responsibility. You're in charge when they're young. If they just want to eat junk, say no. And at 3 years old, they'll listen to you. And by the time they're 5, they'll be used to eating balanced meals and they'll like it. That's, but if you let them go early on, then they're hard to, they're addicted. They're probably addicted to several things. You give them sodas, they're probably addicted to caffeine. Mm-hmm. Most sodas will have caffeine if the parents aren't careful about, keeping that away from them. So there'll be caffeine addicts and there'll be sugar addicts. Withdrawals. If you try to cut the stuff back, they're going to get miserable. And when they get miserable, if you just cave in and say, well, okay, here's some more of your dope, well, sooner or later, they're going to crash. They're just not going to do well. And maybe they'll grow up and become absent parents who aren't really paying attention and don't care much because they're still drug addicts. And then that perpetuates itself. But we're now in probably the second generation of junk food junkies. That's why they call it a junk food junkie, because you really do get addicted to the junk food, a physical addiction to the junk food, which is mainly carbohydrates and fat. And those carbohydrates are addictive, whether they come in the form of sugar, whether they come in the form of whole wheat bread. They're carbohydrates, and they're addictive. So the parents are just going to have to step up to the responsibility. And if they've already missed that point and now they've got 8-year-olds, well, it's tough.
It is.
You know, it's tough now because to deal with that, you really need to go back, 4 years, 5 years to where they were used to eating a diet and they were used to eating whatever was on their plate. But if they're used to getting their way and used that they can bully the parents and train the parents to do what they want, which puts the children in charge rather than the parents, well, that is not going to lead to any place good. Eventually, that's going to, in the beginning, it's easy. It's like any addiction. If you are an alcoholic and you just have a beer every day, you drink one beer. Well, that's not so bad. You can function pretty well on that, but then it's 2, and then it's 3, and then it's 4, and then it's a 6-pack. And now you're starting to show signs of dysfunction. But now you're also addicted to alcohol because you're drinking a 6-pack every day. And maybe then you move up to the harder stuff because you can get your buzz on a lot quicker with that, and so on it goes. And you go 5 or 10 years later, and it's not a good place. The people self-destruct. Well, that's true of most any addiction. Addiction doesn't just get there and stay even. Addiction tends to deteriorate an individual over time. So we set our kids up to have health problems, emotional problems, learning problems, because we refuse early on to give them the discipline they need to eat well. And there's junk everywhere.
Yes.
And you can only control their diet until they're like a certain age. After that, it's out of your control. And if you haven't taught them good habits by then, you're lost, because they will find what they want elsewhere. Even if they're not old enough to drive yet, they'll go to school and won't eat their lunch that you pack for them. They'll eat somebody else's. And the lunches that they serve in school, for the most part, are just more junk. Mm-hmm. It's not very nutritious. You get junk food at school. I went to a little thing that it was a grandparents' day, and had a little grandchild who was at the time maybe 4 or 5 in a preschool. And the grandparents were supposed to come in and, kind of hang out with the kid for the last hour of school or something like that, and then maybe take them home or whatever. So it was a grandparents' day. And I went there, and throughout the whole time I was there, they were passing out cake and candy and things, and the teachers were coming around to, it was one thing they had, I can't remember what it was. It was a slice of some sort of cake, and the teacher would come around and pour caramel syrup on everybody's cake, like the cake wasn't sweet enough by itself. And it was just horrible. I'm sitting there watching these kids go to school and be given, what, 2,000 calories worth of sugar, in an hour. They're given all of the sugar. And it's like, well, what do you expect? If you feed them that at school and they're bouncing off the walls and can't learn anything, and school turns into, well, we don't teach anymore, we just keep order. The lower level schools, they don't teach a whole lot. They're just trying to keep everybody from not disturbing the class. It's like a full-time job. The actual teaching is tough to do. You got to babysit first. Well, you feed them like that, what do you expect? They can't.
How do we help these kids? We got to wrap this up shortly, but
we have to educate the parents first. We have to educate the parents. And by this time, like, we're second generation. The parents, many of them, grew up on junk food.
Right.
Junk food started back in the 60s. Okay, 60s, 70s, that's 40 years. Those kids that were little in the 60s are now, already had their children, almost past having children anymore, and their children are having children. So we're second generation, junk food. Mm-hmm. So parents, maybe they grew up on macaroni and cheese and Cocoa Puffs too. Mm-hmm. It's hard to say. Mm-hmm. But a lot of people seem to have a lot of illnesses and a lot of problems these days. Not necessarily something that kills them just yet. That won't happen until they're 60 or so, but just things that slow them down. They feel fatigued, they feel this and they feel that. Well, it's the parents. Most parents don't eat very well either. Most of them eat a lot of junk food. Their kids eat a lot of junk food, and it hurts both of them. So educate the parents first. I mean, we tell them all about raising children, but we don't really emphasize that what they eat is very important to their mental, emotional health and physical health. We don't stress that. And we probably won't until selling junk food is no longer profitable because people don't want it. As long as it's very profitable, a school that probably teaches don't eat junk food will probably get a letter from the administrator say you can't say that because somebody higher up tells them that that's not politically correct. It's hard to say, but it's a problem. Yeah, addiction is a serious problem in a society. So if the parents are addicted to junk food and kids are addicted to junk food, I guess it just gets worse each time. The parents probably have a mild addiction, but they grow up their kids and are more lenient with them because they have the same addictions. Now the kids are even worse. Now the parents are concerned, but they kind of let it get out of hand themselves. So how do you fix it? I guess some tough love. But can a parent who is also a junk food junkie give tough love to a child who's a junk food junkie? That would be a hard one. They'd have to straighten up their own diet, wouldn't we? They can't say, well, I'm an adult, so I get to eat macaroni and cheese and Cocoa Puffs for dinner, and you don't because you have to eat more healthily. That isn't going to work.
Right. It kind of reminds me of the story about Gandhi, who some kid came to him and he wanted to tell him that he couldn't eat sugar anymore, but because he still ate sugar, he couldn't tell him. So he told him to come back in a month or something and said, then he could tell him because then he stopped eating it. So
yes. So that's part of the problem is the parents, their parents, the parents may have been just on the first leading edge of that junk food, thing where the food that was really cheap and plentiful was trash food. So it's another one of those things we have to outgrow, but that's still a part of the industrial society, and we're still adapting to changes.
Right.
That's the agribusiness. That's how do farmers and farm products people make the most money? Well, junk is more profitable than anything else. So that's what they do. That's what they advertise. That's what's on TV. And that's what people eat. And they have scientifically engineered it to be the food that is not only addictive, but tastes good. Mm-hmm. They say, well, you get enough, you can balance sugar, salt, and fat. If you can get the right balance of sugar, salt, and fat, you can make anything palatable. You can make cookies out of sawdust or cardboard. You grind it up in small enough pieces that it isn't tough. And if you can put the right sugar, salt, and fat, people will say, good. So they've learned that science. So they know how to make anything that's cheap taste good. Yeah. Sugar, salt, and fat. There's a book by that name, I think. Something like Sugar, Salt, and Fat, and they talk about the food science that enables them to make stuff that tastes good. Not healthy. Healthy food costs more. Organic food costs more. Mm-hmm. It takes a lot of effort to have your own garden. Mm-hmm. It costs more in time and energy. Everything else costs more. Junk food is cheap, plentiful. So that's part of the Industrial Revolution of making more profits and not really caring too much about whether it hurts people or not. Profit is the key thing. But we'll grow up out of that. One day, people will look around and they'll say, look what we're doing to ourselves and our kids. Mm-hmm. And then it will become just like, don't throw your litter out the window. It'll be this big ad, don't smoke those cigarettes. They're not good for you. We went through that too, where we had all those advertisements. Eventually, we will say, eat a balanced diet, don't eat the junk food. And when people get more educated and more intelligent about what they eat, then it'll change. Until then,
the problem is even the food guides are
Oh, they're terrible.
balance. They're terrible. Yeah.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah, even the government, because the industry now is, it's probably not right to say industry runs the government, but it runs it a whole lot more than it used to. So when they make that, at least in the US, they have that food pyramid, what you should eat most of, and that's not right.
Yeah.
It's made there because, the industry guys get around and say, what kind of food pyramid is going to make sales good?
Right.
And that's what you get for a food pyramid. You get something that's profitable for business, not something that's good to eat.
Yeah.
So you can't get rid of such and such these foods. You put them there. So yeah, it's not a really healthy situation, but it is so endemic in our culture now that it's not just fixing the kids. You got to fix the parents. You probably need to fix the grandparents and the parents and the children to a whole different thing. But then the junk food's brand new. You see, as far as time goes, it's just a new hazard for us to live with. We've beaten all the hazards. We don't worry about being eaten by saber-toothed tigers anymore. We beat them. We killed them all. So we have new things to worry about. Well, junk food now is one. We're only a couple generations in it. Probably another couple of generations will overcome it. It'll go away, and people won't do that. But that's where we are now.
And I think that's probably part of the sensitive kids' journey, is that it has to start somewhere, and we're not getting it. So maybe.
Sure. If they were healthy and had a really good diet, they may not be so quick to go to self-pity. Right. They may not be so quick to see all the negative and be so influenced by all that negativity. They may be stronger internally. Their constitutions may be better. But when you eat trash food, it affects your mind, it affects your body, it affects your emotions, it affects everything. I mean, if you've ever known an alcoholic or somebody else is on some other addictive drug, what are their personalities like? Are they different than people who are not alcoholics? Indeed. What is their worldview like? What's important to them and not important to them? Wow, it's a totally different picture in headspace from an addict's viewpoint than it is for somebody who's not an addict. Well, food isn't any different. If you're a carbohydrate addict, then your viewpoint of the world and the way you see things and what's important and what's not important in your life is going to change. And it's not just about food. It changes your whole outlook. Alcoholic's personality is not just changed when it comes to alcohol. It's changed when it comes to everything. Their whole worldview is just different. Well, it's the same with the food. It's not just changing attitudes toward food. It changes attitudes toward everything. You see the world in a different way when you eat trash food. So yeah, maybe these sensitive kids wouldn't be quite so sensitive or quite so succumb so easily to self-pity and to negativity and despair. If they had a good diet, maybe despair would be further off. They wouldn't get there so quickly.
I think partially it's that they're here to let us know how bad it is, so that when they're going through such a difficult time where parents are having such a problem with them, it's to say, hey, this is not what we need, but we don't know that that's not what we need.
Yeah, absolutely. You've heard the management by crisis.
Yeah.
Well, that's what we're in. It's change by crisis. Right. It wasn't until the early Industrial Revolution really abused people terribly before rules started coming in and said, you can't do that. Right. Initially, there were no rules. Okay, then there's a lot of abuse. Well, then there's some rules. And it's like this. Okay, now we're in this nutritional problem where people are living on junk food and it's ruining their lives and the lives of their children. And until it becomes a crisis, then the problem doesn't exist. Once it's a recognized crisis, then we'll probably do something about it. Well, I suspect in another decade it will be a recognized crisis because of what it's doing to people, to families, to the general, the general IQ, the general emotional intelligence as well. It will probably become a crisis, in which case we will start to educate people differently. We will maybe we will maybe put out rules about, what you can sell as food. Maybe you can't just sell trash as food. Maybe you'll have to sell something that's more nutritious, or you can't label it as food. Well, then we run into the problem of people have free will. And if they want to, eat drugs, well, you can give them drugs, because everybody should have the choice. You see, but if the choice makes you unable to make good choices, then it's a self-fulfilling prophecy. You give people the choice, which makes them make poor choices. So then they make poor choices, and taking that choice, which makes them have more poor choices. And that's not a healthy thing. So we have to be a little smarter than that. We have to be able to educate. Yeah, it's a big problem. It really is, but it's not one that's got an easy solution. No, it's not even going to be as simple as don't throw the garbage out your window. Or stop smoking. That's a similar problem in that it was an addiction, but and it worked.
Stop eating.
Yeah, stop eating isn't going to be, but stop eating junk. Yeah. Well, I probably will start
because the definition of junk is the problem, and the fact that they'll say, well, the food guide says that this is healthy. It's like, yeah, that's the problem. Anyway, we could go on and on and on and on and on about this one, but sensitive kids.
We'll change it. One day we'll see the problem, and it will be changed, and everybody will get along better after that. But for now, I suspect it's going to be the parents who see the children, and we'll start getting research of stuff that kids that eat like this don't prosper as well, in life afterwards. And if we get that sort of thing, then parents will start to change, and they even change their own habits, because they know their habits reflect, to the kids' habits, and we'll get there someday. But as of yet, we haven't suffered quite enough to make a crisis. But we're getting closer, aren't we?
Definitely. All right. Well, if you want more information about Tom, go to his website, My Big Toe, go to his forum, and go to his YouTube station, because it has hundreds and hundreds of videos. You've been listening to News for the Heart. We've been getting to the heart of what matters. Thanks, Tom.
Have a question for Laurie and want to be on the next News from the Heart show? Drop us a line via instant feedback at bmajor.org. News from the Heart is brought to you by Intuitive Soul and is produced by Major Radio for Clear Channel's iHeartRadio and bmajor.org.